I never thought I'd be the kind of man who cries in a hospital parking garage. 63 years old, worked concrete and steel my whole life, buried a wife, raised a son on my own, and there I was, sitting in my truck on level 2 of Mercy General's parking structure in Columbus, Ohio, unable to start the engine because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My son had just told me he wasn't taking me home. Let me back up, because the way it ended wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how it started, how ordinary it seemed, how much I wanted to believe it. My son called on a Tuesday. That alone should have told me something. He never called on Tuesdays. He barely called at all anymore, not since he married into money and moved to that neighborhood in Dublin, where the lawns look like golf courses, and everyone drives a car that costs more than my pension for 2 years. But there he was on my phone, his voice warm in a way I hadn't heard since he was maybe 14 years old. "Pop, the doctor said you need that procedure done. I've already called Mercy General. I made you an appointment for Thursday. Pre-op consultation, and if everything checks out, they'll do it same day. I'll drive you. We'll spend the night at our place after, make a whole thing of it." I had a blockage in my left carotid artery. My doctor had been on me about it for 6 months. It wasn't emergency level yet, but it wasn't nothing either. I'd been putting it off because the idea of anyone cutting near my neck made me feel like a man watching his house get demolished. Necessary, maybe, but still hard to watch. My son offering to drive me felt like grace. Like maybe the years of distance between us. The quiet holidays, the clipped phone calls, the way he'd started talking to me slowly like I was losing my hearing when I wasn't. Maybe all of that had just been life getting in the way, and here was him showing up. Here was my boy. I should have known better. The drive to Columbus Thursday morning was mostly quiet. My son kept his eyes on the road, both hands on the wheel of that silver SUV that probably had more computer in it than the Apollo mission. When I asked about my daughter-in-law, he said she was busy. When I asked about my granddaughter, she just turned 5, big brown eyes, already reading. He said she was with her other grandparents. I told myself he was nervous about the procedure. Some men get like that. They go quiet when they're scared. The hospital was the usual hospital. Fluorescent lights. That particular smell that's half antiseptic and half something you don't want to name. My son checked me in. He carried my overnight bag, the old canvas one I'd used since my Army Reserve days. He got me settled in the waiting area and said he was going to move the car from the drop-off zone to a proper spot. He never came back. At first I figured he got turned around. The parking structure there has an entrance that loops you back out onto the street if you miss the second ramp. I sat in that waiting room for 40 minutes before the intake nurse called my name, and I realized I didn't have the paperwork my son had printed. It was in his bag. Not my bag, his bag, the one he'd been carrying. I had my old canvas duffel with a change of clothes and some toiletries. Everything else, the insurance cards, the surgical consent forms he'd said he'd handle, my reading glasses, my phone charger, all of it had been in a folder he was holding. I borrowed a phone from a nurse named Bertina, a big woman with kind eyes and the no-nonsense manner of someone who'd seen everything twice, and called my son's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. The hospital couldn't proceed without the paperwork and insurance verification. They rescheduled me for the following week, gave me a packet of forms, and sent me to the main lobby to wait for whoever was picking me up. I told them I'd call my ride. Bertina gave me a look that said she didn't entirely believe me, but she had other patients. I sat in the lobby of Mercy General with my canvas duffel on my lap, and I did the math slowly, the way you do when you don't want the answer to come out the way it's coming out. My son had my insurance cards. He had the forms. He'd offered to handle all of it. "Don't worry about the paperwork, Pop. I've got it." And I'd been grateful. I'd let him. Like a fool, I'd been grateful, and I'd let him. My cell phone was at 31%. I'd forgotten my charger. My wallet had $40 in it, and a Visa with maybe $200 left on the credit line, because I'd been living carefully since the pension cut 2 years ago. I didn't have my doctor's direct number memorized. It was in my phone, but my phone was dying. I called my son 3 more times over the next hour. Nothing. I tried my daughter-in-law, straight to voicemail. I sat there for a long time. The lobby of a hospital is a strange place to feel invisible. People are moving constantly. Nurses, orderlies, family members rushing in with that particular tight-faced look of people who've just gotten a call they didn't want to get. Nobody has time to see an old man sitting quietly in a chair, because if they see him, they might have to do something about him. An older gentleman eventually settled into the seat beside me. Not elderly, exactly. I'd put him at 70, maybe 72. But the kind of man who'd been through enough years that it showed in his posture, in the way he moved, careful but not weak. He had a paper cup of coffee from the vending machine and a paperback with a broken spine that he'd clearly read before. He sat down, opened his book, and then looked over at me the way you look at someone when you're not sure if they're okay but you don't want to intrude. "Waiting on news?" he asked. "Waiting on a ride," I said. He nodded like that was a completely reasonable answer and went back to his book. But 2 minutes later, he looked over again. "You've been here a while." It wasn't a question. I didn't have the energy to construct a story. "My son dropped me off for a procedure and didn't come back," I said. "I'm trying to figure out my next move." The man closed his book on his finger to keep his place. He had the hands of someone who'd worked outdoors. Not construction like me, but something else, something in the weather. "How far are you from home?" "Hour north." "About 70 miles. Any other family nearby?" I thought about it, honestly. My wife's sister lived in Dayton, but we hadn't spoken in years. Not a falling out, just the kind of drift that happens when the person connecting you is gone. I had a buddy from my old iron-working crew, but he'd moved to Arizona after his wife retired. I had neighbors. I had the guys from my Tuesday morning coffee group at the VFW hall. None of them were people I could call and say, "My son dropped me at Mercy General," and drove away. "Not really," I said. The man was quiet for a moment. Then, "My name's August Poole. I'm waiting on my sister. She had a hip replacement this morning. Should be out of recovery in the next hour or so. I drove down from Findlay." He paused. "I've got nothing but time right now, and I've got a truck in the parking structure. If you need a ride north, I'm offering one." I looked at him. I've been around enough people in my life to know the difference between the kind of man who offers help because he wants something, and the kind who offers it because it doesn't occur to him not to. August Poole was the second kind. "I couldn't ask you to do that," I said. "You didn't ask. I offered." He shrugged. "I'll be here another couple of hours minimum. After Vera's out of recovery and settled, she won't want company. She never does after anesthesia. Says it makes her mean. I'll need something to do with myself." He reopened his book. "Think on it." I thought on it for about 20 minutes, during which I called my son twice more and got nothing. Then I went back to August Poole and said, "I'd appreciate that ride, if the offer's still good." "It's still good," he said, without looking up from his book. We ended up talking for 2 hours while his sister recovered. August had been a crop insurance adjuster for 30 years, driving rural Ohio, Indiana, and southern Michigan, which explained the hands and the patience. After his retirement, he'd taken up woodworking, made furniture in a shop behind his house. He'd been married twice, the second time happily, and his wife had passed 4 years ago from a stroke that gave no warning. He had a grown daughter in Cincinnati who called every Sunday without fail. "You're lucky," I said, and I meant it without bitterness. "I know," he said, and he didn't say it like he was bragging. I told him about my son. Not everything, not the full weight of the last several years. The way he'd started introducing me to his wife's family as my father, the retired construction worker, with a particular emphasis that was meant to be context, but felt like apology, but the basics. The call on Tuesday, the appointment, the lobby. August listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. "Do you know why?" he asked when I'd finished. I had my theories. My son's father-in-law, a man I'd met maybe 6 times, always at events where everyone was dressed like a magazine, had been scheduled to fly in from Charlotte this weekend. There was some dinner, some introduction of colleagues or clients, the kind of social event where my son needed everything to look a certain way. My son had mentioned it once, briefly, and I'd noticed he hadn't invited me. I hadn't pushed. "I think I embarrass him," I said. It cost me something to say it out loud. August was quiet for a moment. "My first wife's family felt that way about me," he said. "Didn't have a college degree. Drove a county vehicle. Wore work boots to her cousin's wedding because I didn't own dress shoes and couldn't afford them on short notice." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "She didn't say anything about it at the time. Years later, she said it had never bothered her. But there was a period when I could feel it. At every dinner table, at every family function. That feeling that someone in the room was hoping you'd be quieter. Did it stop?" "The marriage stopped," he said. Not unkindly. "But here's the thing. I didn't become a different man to fix it, and I'm not sure I would have wanted to even if I could. I was who I was. I did good work. I raised my daughter right." He looked at me. What does your son do, if you don't mind my asking? Financial consulting. Some kind of advisory firm downtown. He do that himself? Build that from nothing? He did. He's smart. He was always smart. And who taught him that a man's word was worth something, that you showed up when you said you'd show up? I didn't answer, because the answer felt both obvious and hollow at the same time. Vera was released into the waiting area at 4:30. A small woman in her late 60s, sharp-eyed and annoyed in the particular way of someone who hates being dependent on anything, including anesthesia. She looked at me, looked at her brother, and said, "Who's this?" "Fellow I'm giving a ride to," August said. "Of course you are," Vera said, and climbed carefully into the front seat of August's truck. I sat in the back. It was a crew cab pickup, clean but well used, with a bag of wood scraps on the floor and a tape measure clipped to the visor. There was a coffee thermos in the center console that August offered me, and I accepted. We drove north on 23 while Vera slept against the window, and the October light went gold over the flat fields. About halfway home, August said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "What do you want to happen with your son?" I thought about it for a long time. We passed a grain elevator and a water tower painted with the name of a town I'd poured foundations in 30 years ago. "I want him to be a good person," I said finally. "He was, once. I know he was. I remember who he was before he decided who he was embarrassed by." I looked out the window. I don't know if those two things can exist at the same time anymore. Sometimes people need to see themselves from outside to understand what they've become. August said, "Doesn't usually happen until something forces it." He pulled off at my exit without asking for directions. I'd given them to him back at the hospital. He knew the town, had driven through it on claims work years ago. He pulled up in front of my house, a 2-bedroom on a quiet street that I'd owned for 27 years, and he got out to carry my duffel to the door, even though I told him he didn't need to. "Thank you," I said at the door. "I mean that." "I know you do," he said. "That's why it was worth doing." He wrote his number on the back of a claim adjustment business card he still carried out of habit, pressed it into my hand, and drove away. I stood on my porch for a while after his taillights disappeared, in the cooling October evening, and I thought about a man I'd known for 5 hours who'd treated me better than my own son had in years. I didn't call my son that night, or the next day. He called me on Sunday morning. I let it ring. I spent the following week doing the things you do when you don't want to think. Cleaned the gutters, reorganized the garage, went to my Tuesday coffee group at the VFW, and drank bad coffee and talked about football with men whose names I'd known for 20 years. I rescheduled the carotid procedure, with my own paperwork this time, my own insurance cards, a cab arranged through the hospital's patient transport service. I wasn't going to put that off because of my son. August Poole called on Wednesday, said he was heading to Columbus for a woodworking supply run, and asked if I wanted to ride along, no obligation. I said yes, mostly because the alternative was another evening sitting in my house listening to it be quiet. We drove down, and he showed me the shop he bought wood from, a supplier in Hilliard, run by a man who could tell you the moisture content of any board by feel. August walked me through the difference between quarter-sawn and flat-sawn oak in a way that was genuinely interesting, even though I'd never thought about wood as anything other than a material to be framed or formed. He bought more boards than fit elegantly in his truck bed, and we spent 20 minutes figuring out how to strap them down properly, which gave us both something to concentrate on. On the way back, he told me more about his wife, Claudette, how she'd been a school librarian for 30 years, how she'd had opinions about everything, the right way to fold a fitted sheet, the proper temperature for coffee, which direction to hang toilet paper, and he'd thought those opinions were annoying until she was gone, and the house had no opinions in it at all. "Grief is a strange thing," he said. "You don't miss the person the way you expect to. You miss the particular gravity of them, the way they pulled everything in the room toward them without knowing it." I thought about my wife, gone 11 years. I thought about how my son had been the thing that kept me tethered after she passed, and how slowly, quietly, that tether had frayed until I was standing in a hospital lobby, asking myself when exactly I'd become disposable. "Did your daughter ever do anything that disappointed you?" I asked August. He laughed, a real laugh, not polite. "Plenty of times, still does, occasionally, but disappointment is different from betrayal. Disappointment means they fell short of who you knew they could be. Betrayal means they chose something else over you deliberately." He glanced over. "What your son did was a choice. He made a calculation. He was always good at calculations, I said. That's the sad thing about it, August said. 2 weeks after the hospital, my son showed up at my door. He didn't call first. I was in the garage replacing a belt on my table saw when I heard the knock at the front, and by the time I got there he was already stepping back, like he was considering leaving before I answered. He was dressed in his work clothes, the good gray suit, the leather shoes that probably cost as much as my property taxes. He looked like a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say, and then forgotten it the moment he arrived. "Pop," he said. I looked at him. I hadn't seen him in 3 weeks, and before that it had been Thanksgiving, and before that his daughter's birthday party where I'd felt like furniture. He was 41 years old. He had his mother's eyes and my jaw and a set of worried lines across his forehead that were new since the last time I'd looked at him closely. I opened the door wider, not warmly, but wider. He sat at my kitchen table, and I poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of him, and he wrapped both hands around it like he was cold even though the house was warm. "I know what I did," he said. "Tell me anyway," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father-in-law had a dinner on Thursday night. His partners were in from Atlanta. It was supposed to be important, the kind of thing where everyone sizes each other up. He'd asked me months ago to make sure our family presented well." He paused. "He said that. Presented well," I repeated. "I know." My son looked at the table. When he said it, I told myself he didn't mean it the way it sounded. I told myself a lot of things. He looked up at me. "Pop, I had this idea that if you were having the procedure on Thursday, you'd be at his place recovering on Friday and Saturday, and you wouldn't have to come to the dinner. I told myself I was doing it for you, that you wouldn't want to sit through some business dinner anyway, and the part where you drove away." He closed his eyes briefly. "I got a call from my father-in-law's assistant confirming the dinner location, and I didn't turn around. I told myself the hospital would take care of you, that you were fine, that you were stubborn and capable, and you'd figure it out." His voice cracked slightly on the last part. "I know that's not an excuse. It's not. I spent 2 weeks trying to figure out how to come here," he said. I kept picking up the phone and putting it down. My wife finally told me to stop making the decision at home because I was going to make it wrong and to just go. I thought about his wife, a woman I'd never fully understood but had never had reason to dislike either. She'd always been polite to me at holidays, had made sure there were dishes at Christmas I could actually eat, given my stomach. If she was the one who'd sent him, that meant something. "Why did you bring me to that hospital on a Thursday?" I asked. "Specifically, what was the reasoning?" He told me the rest then. His father-in-law had made comments, more than once, over the years, about my son's background. Not mean, never openly mean, just the particular kind of observation that people with money make about people without it, the kind that sounds like curiosity but lands like assessment. My son had been absorbing those observations for 8 years and slowly reshaping himself around them, and somewhere in that process, he'd started to see me through his father-in-law's eyes. "I was ashamed of myself," he said finally. "Not of you, of myself, for becoming someone who would think about that." I sat with that for a while. "You know what the worst part is?" I said. "I understood it before you explained it. That's the worst part. I recognized the look on your father-in-law's face the one time I met him because I've seen that look my whole life. Men in good suits, looking at men like me and deciding we're the set decoration." I picked up my coffee. "What I couldn't understand was why you thought I was disposable enough to leave at a hospital." "Because I'm a coward," my son said. "I've been one for a long time, and I didn't know how to stop." We sat for a while after that without talking. The furnace clicked on and off. Outside, somebody's dog was barking at something 2 streets over. "There's a man named August Poole," I said finally. "He's 71 years old, lives in Finlay, makes furniture in his garage. He drove me home from Columbus because he was in the waiting room, and he didn't want to see an old man stranded." I looked at my son. He asked me one question on the drive home. He asked what I wanted to happen, not what I was owed, not what you deserved, what I wanted. My son was very still. "I've been thinking about the answer for 2 weeks," I said. "And here's what I've got. I want you to be the man I know you're capable of being. Not for me. I'm 63 and I've had a good run, and I'll be fine either way. For your daughter. For the version of yourself you're going to have to look at in 20 years when she's grown, and you're sitting somewhere wondering whether you did it right. Pop, I'm not finished." I set my cup down. "I have a carotid procedure scheduled for the 14th. Patient transport is taking me. If you want to be there, In the waiting room, as my son, no suits, no father-in-law's opinion, no calculations. You can be there. If not, I'll see you at Christmas. I looked at him. That's my answer. He came on the 14th. He sat in the waiting room for 4 hours in jeans and a flannel shirt I hadn't seen him wear since maybe 2015, the one his mother had bought him on a camping trip. He brought bad vending machine coffee and a magazine neither of us read. When they wheeled me out of recovery, and I was still groggy from the sedative, the first thing I saw clearly was my son standing at the foot of the bed, and he looked so much like the 14-year-old who used to sit on the tailgate of my truck after Little League games that I almost forgot we were in a hospital at all. "You look terrible," he said. "Thank you," I said. "You're here." "I'm here," he said. He drove me home and stayed the night, sleeping in his old room with the twin bed that was 6 inches too short for him now. In the morning he made eggs, and we ate them at the kitchen table the way we used to when it was just the two of us after his mother passed, before the suits and the golf course neighborhood and the years of careful distance. "I called August Poole," my son said, over the eggs. I looked up. "You did?" I looked him up through the hospital. They had his information as the person who'd driven you home. It was in your intake notes. I wanted to thank him. My son pushed a piece of egg around his plate. "He told me something." "What did he tell you?" "He said the kind of man who raises a son who can feel ashamed of him is usually the same kind of man who raised that son to understand what integrity is. He said the shame doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from knowing what the right thing looks like and choosing differently anyway." My son looked up at me. "He said to tell you that Vera's doing well and she's still mean after anesthesia." I laughed. It came out rough and unexpected, and it felt good. "He's a good man," I said. "Yeah," my son said. "He is." He paused. "I'd like to meet him properly sometime, if that'd be okay." It took a long time after that to rebuild what we'd let go to ruin. You don't fix 8 years of drift in a conversation over eggs, and I wouldn't want to pretend we did. There were dinners that were still awkward, holiday events where his father-in-law's discomfort with me was still visible, moments when old habits surfaced, and I could see my son making a choice about which direction to turn. Sometimes he turned the wrong way, but he turned back. His daughter started calling me every Sunday. 5 years old and already with opinions about everything. The right way to build a block tower, which color was the best color, why her stuffed elephant was smarter than her stuffed rabbit. She'd inherited my wife's certainty about things, that specific flavor of knowing your own mind. I told my son this, and he smiled in a way that took 10 years off his face. August Poole came to Thanksgiving that year. I'd been talking to him on the phone most weeks, and when I mentioned that I was hosting for the first time, my son and daughter-in-law and granddaughter, a deliberate attempt at something that might become a tradition, August said it sounded like a lot of work for one man. "Then come help," I said. He brought Vera, who was recovered and no longer mean about it, and a sweet potato casserole that made my daughter-in-law ask 3 times for the recipe. My son and August spent an hour in the garage after dinner looking at the table saw, and I stood in the kitchen doorway watching them, and felt something settle in me that I hadn't known was still disturbed. My son shook August's hand when they left that night, a real handshake, the kind that means something. The carotid procedure worked. My doctor says the blood flow is good, better than he expected. I go back for checkups twice a year, and I drive myself, which I consider a form of stubbornness I'm proud of. My son calls on Tuesdays now. Tuesdays specifically, he said, because that's the day that matters. I didn't ask him to explain that, and I understood it anyway. Last month, I was back at Mercy General. Routine follow-up, nothing serious. And I sat for a few minutes in the same lobby where August Poole had first spoken to me. Different arrangement of chairs now, different light coming through the windows. But the same particular quality of air, that hospital hum of people waiting for things to be resolved. A man was sitting alone against the far wall. Maybe late 60s canvas jacket, the specific stillness of someone who's trying not to look as lost as he is. I got myself a coffee from the vending machine. Then I got another one. I walked over and sat down in the chair beside him. "Waiting on news?" I asked. He looked at me, surprised to be spoken to. "Waiting on a ride," he said. I nodded. "I know that feeling." "Well," I said, and handed him the second coffee. "Let's see what we can figure out."